Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff, and this is the Openviro update video, and I'm going to be fully upfront here. This is a video that I should have made well over a month ago, and I apologize for any delay on my part. On the creator side of things, this has been basically the busiest travel season that I've ever had, and it did slow some of the late-stage production things that I had to accomplish with Openviro. But today I wanted to talk about where we were at with production on Openviro and when you can expect your orders to ship. Too long, didn't watch. I'm expecting to deliver devices to Crowd Supply the first week of February, with shipping out to backers shortly thereafter. This is obviously well past our original estimate of by the end of summer, and I should have given you all an update well before this. While I am incredibly excited about developing Openviro into a series of products, the reality is that I am still a one-man operation with a part-time remote developer, so progress has been much slower than I anticipated. But all of the wheels are finally in motion, and I'm hoping to be crossing the finish line here shortly. Now, why did it take so long to get to this point? I thought Openviro was basically production ready when we launched the pre-order campaign, right? Well, while we were confident in our design with both Openviro and our thermal probes, we still had to undergo testing for CE compliance to make sure everything was actually fine, and we did run into a couple unexpected problems. First, the good news. In designing the Openviro PCBs, we didn't create an accidental radio, and interference testing went perfectly, so kudos to us there. However, when it comes to electrostatic discharge testing, we did run into a couple problems. ESD testing makes sure that when there is a static charge that unloads on your device, it's safely dissipated without damaging the device or anything near it. In ESD testing, it's not whether or not you're going to pass or fail, but at what point your device will fail. We did pass air discharge at up to 15 kilovolt, which is a very solid result, but it was the contact ESD that finally did us in at 4,000 volts. When talking about ESD contact testing, 4 kilovolt is actually a pretty reasonable place to fail, but we didn't like the way that we failed. See, the brain unit actually passed the 4K direct contact test with no problem at all. It was when we tested the probes that we ran into a critical failure. The 4kV discharge found a path back to the brain and killed the network controller, something that in theory shouldn't have been possible since there's no direct path between the probe and that particular chip. As far as finding a path into the probe itself, that one's actually a pretty easy thing to fix. You see, inside the probe, we have 4 screws that attach the lid down. Underneath that is actually an air baffle that is supposed to isolate all of the components from any potential thermal transfer or ESD discharge. However, we left an air gap on one of the screws, and it found a way to ground by connecting to one of the capacitors on the PCB. It jumped that air gap. Now, once that happened, it then traveled up the cable into the brain and damaged the network controller. We opted to not only fix the probe and eliminate the air gap with a minor redesign of the case internals, but also add additional protection to the brain itself, with TVS diodes along the data lines from the probes. This, along with a minor redesign to the power circuitry in the brain, meant that we needed to respin the PCB and go through all of our validation testing again. That, coupled with an extraordinarily busy couple of months at the end of summer, pushed the manufacturing date back further than I originally anticipated, even when originally accounting for a possible delay like this. But now that we're finally back on track, where does Openviro sit now? Well, obviously we have multiple pieces from multiple vendors to bring together to make Openviro X PoE a reality. Starting off, we obviously have both PCBs, one for the brain and one for our probes. Those need to be cut, and then all the components need to be soldered into place. We have aluminum cases for the brains to go in. We also have end caps for each side of this case. That's another vendor separate from the enclosure itself. We have the 3D printed enclosures for the probes, which are actually 3 separate pieces. We have screws for both the probe case as well as the brain unit. We have 6P6C cables to connect the probes to the brains, and then of course we also need to flash and validate function on each unit before putting them into final packaging and then shipping them out for sale. The bulk PCB manufacturing order was placed at the end of October and should take around 7 weeks for product to be delivered, assuming a smooth transition through customs, and I also prepaid my tariff fees, and I have thoughts on that, but this is neither the time nor the place for that discussion. That puts finished boards arriving in the US the week of Christmas. Realistically, I don't expect I'll have boards in hand until at least the beginning of January. I've also ordered the aluminum cases, which should be shipped out in the next couple of weeks. End caps are from a different vendor, and that's actually one that's happening domestically. Now, I'm not going to order those immediately. I want to receive the final aluminum cases first so I can revalidate that the end caps still fit and all my ports still line up before placing that final order. Once the cases arrive, I'll also be ordering the screws to assemble all the brain units. Now, you might not think that that's a huge order. That's 8 screws per brain unit. That's 5,600 screws that I need to order for the 700 brain units that we sold. So it's a lot more screws than you might think. Also, once the cases and end caps all arrive, they'll all need to be laser engraved, which I'll be doing in-house with my 30-watt Galvo fiber laser. The front of this needs to be engraved with the Openviro logo and the Axe PoE, as well as the specific revision, serial numbers, MAC addresses, anything like that on the backside. The end caps will also need to be laser engraved and finished. They will need to be either deburred or media blasted in some way, as the service that I've chosen to manufacture these doesn't offer deburring services on parts that are this small. So I'll either need to find another service locally to handle that or handle that myself. For the probe cases, I'm going to start out by farming out some of these cases on my pair of 3D printers and see how feasible that actually is for a full production run. I may either purchase another pair of printers to help speed up production, or farm out production entirely to a 3D print service. It all depends on how much time and labor will actually be involved doing this myself versus farming it out. Luckily, we still have 8 to 10 weeks before the 3D prints need to be completed, so I'd like to do that in-house if at all possible. And last but not least, final assembly will likely take the better part of a week, with some of my friends and family doing a bit of labor in exchange for some pizza and beer. Again, this is still a one-man operation, and it took me enough time to assemble the 400 Wi-Fi units, which were basically drop-in-place. We have 700 Openviro brains and 1,200 THP probes to assemble, all with more components and complexity than the original beta units had. There's obviously still a ton of work to be done, but most of the time-costly steps are now behind us. There's always a chance of more delays, specifically when it comes to customs or shipping, but I also think we are well on our way to getting these things shipped out in early February. Thank you all for your patience and understanding while we work through what is obviously our largest run of devices yet. Backers should start receiving their orders shortly after they arrive at Crowd Supply. And if you didn't get a device during the pre-order, you will be able to order directly from Mouser as soon as all pre-orders have been fulfilled. But that is the sticking point with me, is you will not be able to buy from Mouser until all pre-orders have been fulfilled. If you backed this project, you're going to be receiving your device first. But once those orders have been fulfilled, Mouser will be stocking the Openviro Axe PoE as a regular product moving forward, which means you can order with immediate fulfillment. And last but not least, a couple quick notes moving forward. First off, we will be open sourcing the codebase for Openviro and publishing it as soon as the devices start shipping. From the GitHub page, you'll be able to view our source code, as well as download the latest compiled firmware for Openviro devices. Links to the GitHub will be made available to everyone once devices start shipping. Second, we'll also be launching a Discord server for Openviro owners around the same time. We have no firm plans on how this will work yet, but invite links will be sent out to backers when the channel launches. And I do want to state again, I do apologize for the late update, but it is all good news from this point forward, and I think we are finally on the last steps of getting these all assembled and shipped out to you. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact us at info@openviro.com. Thanks again to Crowd Supply and Mouser for their support throughout this process. And lastly, thanks again to all of you for all of your support. I can't wait to finally get these out and into your hands. Thanks everyone, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.